So in the last episode, we did our trial build and we ascertained that everything kind of is going to fit together okay. But I did also point out a few things that I wanted to change about this. The first one is this headstock facing. I'm not very happy with this kind of wood. I'd have to do something with it. And I thought I might as well do something nice. So what I'm going to do is I've created a little headstock veneer out of some rosewood. It's a little bit of a colour difference between the fingerboard, but this will be lacquered, so I'm hoping that that will darken off a little bit with the lacquer, and I'm going to glue that in place. Now I had a little bit of difficulty making this because the one bandsaw blade I've got in the shop at the moment is ridiculously blunt, so I eventually forced a little bit of rosewood through that, but it was very uneven, so I then just set up a thicknessing jig on the bench top and used that to thin this down. It's perhaps a touch thinner than I might have wanted. It's kind of a mil. Yeah, it's just a touch over a millimetre. I thought I would go with 2, but 1 millimetre is absolutely fine. So next up, I need to get this glued into position very quickly so that we can then think about putting on one of my little mother of pearl inlays. You might notice I've marked on the nut where the truss rod cutout is so that I can trim this out once it's all glued in place. So realistically, nothing for it but to kind of create a bit of a clamping caul for the top of here, and then we get some glue on the job and get it clamped on. So dead straightforward, nothing you haven't already seen 1,000 times. Dollop some tight bond on there. It's going to go into the tuner holes, but we can kind of sort that out at a later date. Not too worried about that. Just make sure we're getting that in the right position. I'll lightly clamp it in place with some of these quick grips first, then just make sure it's properly lined up. Which we seem to be. In fact, I'll turn them round. That's going to make it awkward otherwise. I can just work my way around and get some decent clamping pressure onto it. Okay, so that's created a nice little clamp porcupine. I'll leave this for an hour or so for the glue to dry up. I'll go in and get some lunch. We'll get our clamps and see how we've done. Well, that's that veneer glued on and it seems to have gone down quite nicely. I'm just going to break out a scalpel and I'm just going to kind of roughly trim this to size. The trick to doing this is don't try and go through in one go. Kind of take several passes at it and just work your way through the material and you'll get a much more accurate cut without causing any damage. And I'm only rough cutting this for the moment. I can break out the router in a little while and properly flush trim this. But that will give us an idea of how well that's gone down, and to be honest, it's looking good. So I think without further ado, we'll get that in the vise. And we'll just break out the router with a flush trim bit in and give that a quick tickle up. Okay, and that's that facing glued on. It's actually gone on really nicely. I'm very happy with that. So next up, we need to just kind of open up these tuner holes again. And hopefully this shouldn't really be a big deal. Just very delicately run through them with an appropriately sized drill bit. I've got a nice sharp Famag drill bit here. And that seems to be doing an absolutely smashing job. And then the last thing we need to do is just open up this little truss rod cover element. And I think what I'm going to do is I'll use a smaller drill bit and drill a couple of holes through there. And I think I'm just going to just kind of carve that away with a scalpel until I get near where I need to be. Okay, and that's that sorted out. Absolutely lovely. Obviously we need to put the logo on here, but I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to save that for another episode. So next up is we need to kind of look at these frets and just make sure everything's okay there before we get this neck glued in. Now I have already identified that the fret ends are quite sharp. I think I might have been a little bit too mean about these fret ends in the last episode. They're okay. They're just not kind of up to the standard that I'd want. So I am going to spend a little bit of time and get these fettled up a bit nicer. But before I do that, I want to check that everything is as it should be in terms of straightness for the neck and that there's no kind of high or low frets in here. So to start that, I'm going to break out my notched straight edge and just make sure that the neck is nice and flat, which it appears to be. So we know that the neck is pretty straight in that setup. And then with the neck in the vise so it's not moving around all over the shop, I'm just going to break out the fret rocker and have a look at them, and there are actually, it looks to be a little bit, there are definitely There are some high frets up here. Just there. There's something going on. And you can actually feel these two frets. You can easily get a fingernail under them. So I'm going to break out the trusty fretting hammer and something underneath it just to make sure I'm not going to dent the neck up too much. And we'll just see if we can get those two knocked in a little bit. And looking down the board, the rest of them look okay. So with those knocked in, we'll just see what the fret rocker tells us now. That seems to have got it. I'll check the rest of the board off camera. I'm pretty sure that everything should be okay. It was just a case of those couple of frets weren't quite knocked in properly. Hopefully everything's okay now and we can move on to the next stage. And that's all checked out lovely now. I'm kind of happy enough with those. I don't think there's going to be any problem whatsoever with them. So next I just want to tackle these kind of dodgy fret ends. Now you might remember that a few weeks ago when I was doing this job on the Johnny Ramone guitar that I lost my little fret end dressing file. It completely snapped in two, so that's useless. And I've been looking for another one and I've really struggled to find one, to be honest. There are some out there, but I'm not paying 30 odd quid for a file to do this simple job. So instead I've dug out an old file that I've had knocking around for a bit. It's a bit chatty and a bit dirty, but it does still cut quite nicely. And I've ground it on the grinding wheel and kind of smoothed it off with some finer sandpaper. And I've tried to replicate the profile of the little file. So this side, I've ground a safe edge on that's kind of rounded. And this side, I've got a safe edge that is very square. And the square edge, get the big eyes on so I can see what I'm doing. The square edge is to get right into that corner there and just take that material out. And then with the rounded edge, you can just round over the rest of that. And that already is an awful lot better. And then I'll just get some sandpaper. This is 240. We can just get rid of the file marks with that. I'll probably give these frets a quick polish once I've done this, but for the time being I will just concentrate on getting this done. And this file actually is a little bit coarser than the old file, which means that you only need kind of one stroke to get that hemispherical fret end. Right, I'll do the rest of those off camera. Join you back for the next stage. And there's the fretboard all sorted out, polished up the frets nicely, everything looking wonderful. So I think we've gone as far with this neck now as we can before we get it glued in. So I'll give it a quick clean up, get rid of this gunk from the polishing process, and then we'll see about getting it set up in the body. And basically all I've got to do before we get the glue onto this is just double check that we're going to glue the neck in the right position for the scale length. So that's going to involve slipping the bridge back in temporarily. And then just I'm slipping that neck in and just leaving it kind of a little bit this way so it's not right in the back of the pickup route. And then I'm measuring from the nut to the high E string saddle, and I'm looking for 24 3/4 inches, and that's just a little bit further away than I would like it. So I'm just going to see if I can just scotch it up a little bit. But we're pretty much smack on there. So I'm going to turn that over. And I'm just going to put smallest of pencil marks there. So I know that that's where we need to be. Take that out for hopefully the last time. I'm just going to get a couple of clamps and some clamping cauls to hand. Break out the tight bond. It gets glued up. I don't think it really takes a lot of pointing out that this is the most important part of this build. I think virtually everything else I'm going to do will offer me a second chance. Now technically, if I got this wrong, I could get the neck out again. But it's not going to be easy, let's be honest. So I want to make sure I'm absolutely spot on before I go any further, and that looks to be good. So get a clamping caul under there. Need a clamp with a slightly deeper throat. Just check we're still on my mark, which we are. We'll just clean up that squeeze out. And I think for the time being, that's pretty much as we can do. I'll leave that for a couple of hours just for the glue to dry, get the clamps off, and then I can kind of just recheck to make sure that everything's okay. I can't see how it isn't. The neck is pushed right into that neck joint, and it's all good for the marks that we put on, so we should be absolutely spot on in terms of intonation. And that seems like a really fitting place to leave this episode. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time when we can move on to the next stage of this, which I think is going to be addressing the situation with the pick guard that came with the guitar, because I don't really like it and I want to do something different with it. But that's obviously going to be for next time. I'm going to leave this one here. So don't forget to hit the like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.